Welcome to Steel Stories by US Steel. In this podcast, we explore the wealth of knowledge from leading industry experts to help you navigate the infinitely developing, renewable world of steel.
Well, welcome to another episode of Steel Stories. I'm David Kirkpatrick, your host. And today, we're going to have a special episode looking at something that we haven't talked about much before, which is cars and the automotive industry. There's a huge, deep connection between the steel industry and the auto industry. US Steel is a major supplier to American automakers, and many parts of the cars that are made in the United States are made of steel, much of it from United States Steel. Our guest today is Rebecca Lindland, who is a major auto expert. She is the managing director for Stagwell's automotive work. Stagwell is a marketing and communications group that works extensively with both major automakers and suppliers. So one of the main things we're going to be talking about today is the fact that no matter how much technology evolves, car buyers have non-negotiable expectations, many of which steel plays a role in fulfilling. Well, Rebecca, it's so good to have you with us. Talk a little bit about your background and what got you interested in cars.
So thank you so much for having me on. I'm so excited to be here. And as my mother would attest, I have known every car on the road since I was a little kid, and I don't know why. They just all look different to me. I love them. I love the styling. I love the manufacturing of them. I love to visit factories. It's just something that is incredible. I'm just incredibly passionate about it. And I've been fortunate enough to work at some fantastic companies that let me indulge my enthusiasm and my love of cars.
Well, that's pretty cool. Well, that gives you a lot to tell us today. Thank you. Well, why don't we start by talking a little bit about those non-negotiable expectations? What are the big ones that you're thinking about?
So the big ones that we really look at when we think about new car buyers is durability, reliability, and safety. Those are the table stakes. Those are the characteristics that, despite all the emotion that you have when it comes to car buying, good and bad, those are the table stakes: durability, reliability, and safety.
Wow. Well, those are all pretty important. I can say myself as a car buyer. Well, let's start with safety. It's a big priority for buyers. Steel obviously is a factor in why cars have become so much safer than they used to be. Tell me a little bit about the innovations that we've seen in safety in the auto industry.
So what's fascinating about the industry is that we demand more and more from our vehicles. Not only are we expecting to get from A to B safely and reliably, but all of a sudden we need to have great fuel economy. We need to carry 5 to 7 people, or at least have the seats for it. And we also want to, of course, get there with that safety that I mentioned. Steel plays a role in that, as it's very much a frame around yourself, both literally and figuratively. Your vehicle says a lot about you when people drive down the road, and that steel hull is that frame.
Yeah, so the steel plays a big role in protecting drivers and passengers, right?
It absolutely does. And we've seen tremendous innovation when it comes to high strength, lightweight steel. This is what's helped us achieve better fuel economy and at the same time meet the demands of that consumers want, where they're carrying, or they want to carry, or they have the expectation to carry those 5 to 7 people. As we've seen, so many more SUVs are on the road today, and pickup trucks as well.
So in a way, some of those priorities could otherwise have been, and maybe still are, a little bit conflicting. People want to get really good gas mileage, but they want a really big car and they want it to be really safe, right?
Exactly. And so while the regulations have demanded that we get better fuel economy, we also want to have a vehicle that does a lot of things for us, that goes off road, that we can take to the DIY store to be able to throw all kinds of stuff in. And so we do want a lot from our vehicles. We want it to meet that. Average fuel economy now is 27.1 miles per gallon. And just for perspective, in 1975, it was 13.1. What's interesting about that too is that the majority of vehicles back in the 70s and 80s and into the 2000s even were cars. But now 80% of vehicles of new car sales are SUVs and pickup trucks. And yet we've been able to get better fuel economy, even though we're driving bigger and bigger vehicles. And much of that is due to the innovations that we've seen in steel.
Yeah, so lightweight steel, it has really made a lot of strides in allowing the auto industry to more or less meet these challenges of the moment.
It really is. About 54% of your vehicle is steel, is still steel. A lot of it is electronics as well. And keep in mind too, when we think about that safety, we've added airbags, we've added all kinds of cabin safety around it. You'll see those crash zones and you'll see people surviving really incredible crashes as long as you're wearing your seatbelt and as long as you're operating your vehicle safely. The industry has done all that it can to ensure that people are safe in their vehicles. And a lot of that is due to both standard steel, but also that high strength, lightweight steel that is so strong to keep you and your family and your pets safe.
Yeah, and I know US Steel makes that. You talk a little bit more about the efficiency that vehicles have achieved. How have they done that besides the lightweighting? I mean, is it aerodynamics? Is it other stuff?
So aerodynamics is one of my favorite things because you can, again, it's a great visual. You can look and literally see, this white cloud going through around a vehicle in an aerodynamic tunnel. And the slightest changes can make a difference. I remember talking to a wonderful designer and engineer from General Motors, and they literally took their phone, and this is in Germany at their plant, at their design studio, and they said, I want the wheel well to have this kind of travel. All of that is aerodynamics. At the same time, we like to have a really crouched, great looking vehicle. We don't want to compromise. And yet, aerodynamics plays such a huge role in both design and getting that fuel economy. Being able to shape and have malleable steel is also a key ingredient in meeting both design and fuel economy expectations for consumers. We don't want to drive anything ugly.
Yeah, and I know computer-aided design and probably even now AI are playing a role in that. If we didn't have these super sophisticated programs that allow for sort of hypothetical testing and really, really subtle changes in the aerodynamic configuration of every element of the vehicle, it wouldn't be possible.
It wouldn't be possible, but clay design is also still a thing. Full size clay models. And this is where the designers can shape and just shave off a little bit. They smooth those edges. All of that helps with getting a more aero design. The other thing that's helped with fuel economy also is a change in our powertrains. We used to have a lot of V8 engines. We used to have a lot of V6 engines. Now we have a lot of 3-cylinder, 4-cylinder. We have displacement on demand. So once you're on the highway, if you have a 6-cylinder, it'll go down to 4 cylinders and you don't even notice it. All of this is transparent to the consumer.
Right. Hybrids, of course, and vehicles that stop running at a stoplight and automatically start up again as soon as you hit the accelerator.
That awful feeling that you had in college or high school when your car stopped and it wasn't supposed to. You're like, oh my God, please start.
Now it's supposed to do that.
Yes, now it's supposed to do that. Exactly.
What about other elements? I mean, have we made big changes in the tires, and are there other pieces of this puzzle?
There are. So low rolling resistance tires also helps with fuel economy. And again, we've seen tremendous innovation in this regard where we'll have thinner tires, smaller tires. But again, we've had consumers say, I don't want those. I want, big because of style and design, the emotional part of it. So we've had to get some bigger and bigger tires, 20-inch tires, 22-inch rims. These used to be 14-inch. They used to be tiny little tires on your vehicles. And now we want all of those design elements plus this great fuel economy, plus no compromises on safety. So we've put a lot of expectations on suppliers, both from the tire industry and certainly from steel, from materials. And of course, we want something that is recyclable, sustainable with both a small and big S. And so we've just asked a lot from the industry.
Well, I know too that you have talked about how some car models might have started out kind of clunky looking, and they've just become more and more elegant and beautiful and streamlined over time.
It's hard to shock the auto industry, but I have to give kudos to Toyota because that new Prius is so much better than any other Prius that came before it. Prius was a compromise for a lot of people from a design and an emotional standpoint, but it doesn't have to be anymore. And I think the new Prius is a great example of that. We're also seeing it across the board. I think a lot of the both hybrids and EVs that we're seeing coming out today are just so much prettier from an aesthetic standpoint, from a design standpoint. Again, you don't have to compromise anymore between a good fuel economy vehicle and design.
Okay, when you mentioned EVs, that's a huge factor in where the auto industry is going. Let's talk about that. How do you see where we are in the EV transition? And what are some of the most important things you see going on?
So there's a few things. I've worked in this space for a long time now, well over 12, almost 15 years now. What's fascinating, a few things that are interesting to me. The first is that back as recently as 2010, 15 years ago now, we only had really three choices for an EV. It was the Nissan Leaf, it was the Tesla Roadster, and it was the Chevy Volt PHEV, which got about 30 to 40 miles on an EV and then switched over to an engine. Now we have almost 70 different models from 30 different brands. There's a tremendous amount of choice out there. And again, they come in all different sizes. Mercedes, Audi, they have full lineups. Chevrolet has a full lineup. I mean, it's really amazing when we look at electric vehicles and again, the choices. The problem really is charging, especially in the US. We have about 190,000 gas stations. We've got about 68,000 chargers, and this is public chargers. Just for perspective, let me pull this up real quick because when I was looking at this, in China, they have 7.2 million chargers.
Wow.
7.2 million
Public charging stations.
charging stations.
Wow.
7.2 million EV charging stations, 2.2 million public, and 4.9 million private. We are nowhere even close. And so this is the biggest challenge is people have both range anxiety, but they really have is charging anxiety.
Well, that's one reason I think China is making a massive shift towards EVs. I believe something around 50% of auto sales in China are now electric.
Absolute massive shift. I think one of the challenges that the industry really has is we've not shown the consumer how an EV is a better, more convenient solution for their mobility needs. People are willing to adopt technology if it makes their life more convenient, if it makes their life better, if it makes their life somehow easier. And the resistance to EVs is really that it doesn't meet those three needs for a lot of consumers.
Yeah. What about Europe? How does Europe compare to the US in terms of the infrastructure?
So Europe is definitely better, but they also do have a lot more incentives on their EVs. So particularly in Scandinavia, they had at one point, it was almost free to get vehicles like a Tesla. And so they've had a lot more push. Also by country, they're trying to cover a lot less space than the US is overall. So obviously I live out here in Los Angeles. In California, we have a lot more chargers than we have maybe in the Midwest. So Europe has similar needs in terms of if you think of each country as a state, they've been able to meet some of those needs. Also keep in mind too that gas prices are so much higher in Europe due to taxation mostly. So they have more incentive to transition over to EVs.
And Americans often drive longer distances, or at least think they do, right?
So this, I call it the perception of the exception. So, oh my goodness, once a year we go to grandma's house. We drive 250 miles in a day or 200 miles. Therefore, I can't get an EV. So, this again is this idea that it doesn't fit into their lifestyle. In reality, the average consumer drives about 35 miles a day, possibly even less now because so many more people work from home or at least work from home, in a hybrid state. Like I go into the office 2 days a week. So people, well, we have not seen a dramatic change in overall average miles driven. We do see some changes in how people are using their vehicles. If you have a home charger, you really are able to refuel at home. The challenge is not everyone can have a home charger.
So, okay, well, the batteries, let's talk about the batteries because they're changing and they've gotten better, but they're still not where most people think they ought to be. I mean, it does also takes a long time to charge them. Is the perception, is that perception still accurate?
So the perception is accurate depending upon what charger you're staring in front of. And batteries have absolutely come a long way. The older electric vehicles can't even accept something like a high charge, fast charge level 3 charger. But the newer ones, the newer EVs can accept these level 3 chargers, which are the public chargers. They can charge a vehicle in 20 to 25 minutes. I've seen this myself. I was driving the Audi e-tron in Abu Dhabi a number of years ago, and we were able to go to lunch. We came back in half an hour to a fully recharged vehicle on the Audi e-tron. And again, we can see this in the Tesla fast chargers, the superchargers, which all manufacturers have access to now. The level 2 charger is the one that you typically will put in at home. So those are the wall chargers that you'll see. They require a 220 volt line, something like if you have a dryer in your home, you have an access to that 220, you have a line there. Whether it's conveniently placed is something that you have to figure out yourself at home. But the level 2 chargers, they can generally charge in 8 to 12 hours. I know that sounds like a long time, and it is when you're in public, but when you're at home, it's really not that long. I mean, you get home from work or from wherever you are, even if you get home at midnight, you're generally home for, ideally 6 to 8 hours, and you've got to leave again. If you're a doctor or a bartender or something, hopefully not. But, people are home. And so you're able to charge on that level 2 charger at home.
And there have been some major initiatives to try to build out a bigger public charging infrastructure. I know the government, under various programs, had a very ambitious program that I guess didn't really totally take off. And now there's industry initiatives that are very well organized with some big ambitions. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Installing chargers is challenging. It's expensive. They're about the chargers, the level 3 chargers are about $100,000 a piece minimum just for the unit. So these are very, very expensive. It is a big undertaking. You do have to, again, if you don't have an available appropriate wiring, you do have to install all of that. So it is a big task. What we'd like to see is more food chains getting involved, rest areas, all of that. We do have opportunities. Again, we see the Tesla supercharger is a great model to follow. And the fact that more vehicles now can use the Tesla supercharger is great. The challenge, of course, is that on high peak demand times, you could be waiting a couple of hours for your supercharger. So adding infrastructure is absolutely key. Again, we are well behind in this regard, which is why even though the manufacturers have been able to come out with vehicles that are getting 200, 300, 350 miles of range, where do you charge it continues to be a challenge.
Yeah. And I know Ford, for example, has a deal with Tesla that allows their drivers to use Tesla charging stations with an adapter. But what about standardization? And we can move off of EVs shortly, but isn't there a real challenge to get just one sort of charger that everybody could use?
Yes. So on a global basis, we use about 5 different chargers. The most popular are CHAdeMO, and then CCS 1 and 2. And we really need to standardize. I was talking to a Nissan Leaf owner the other day. It's an older version of it, and she's got CHAdeMO and she can't really charge in all other locations. So it definitely, that standardization is an ongoing challenge. So much, again, thinking about the early days of this when I was working with the National Academy of Sciences on barriers to electric vehicle deployment, we were looking at these types of standardizations. It's getting better, and those adapters are certainly helping, but we're still suffering a bit from this very disjointed foundation that was never really established for EV adoption.
So what's the bottom line? How do you think we're moving towards a more electric vehicle society? Is that what would you summarize here?
What I would like to see is consumers buying the most fuel efficient version of what suits their wants and needs in a vehicle. So, and again, this is where we think about the new powertrains that are out. We think about hybrids. Hybrids are a fantastic solution for a consumer because they're able to get, again, that really good fuel economy. A lot of times they're able to drive just on EV. They can recharge as they're driving with regenerative braking, another great innovation. So there's a lot of opportunity there. The other part that we're seeing when we think about innovation is we're going more towards drive-by-wire. And so we're getting away from typical hydraulics and gears and all of that. And we're moving again towards a more electronically based software-defined vehicle. All of this is about the consumer and again, getting that lightweight. But the role that steel plays is you still got a steel frame around all of those wonderful electronics that we're implementing to make a vehicle safer.
Yeah, I want to get into the electronics and the autonomy issues, et cetera, in a minute. But let's shift over to how people use cars. And there's been a lot of talk in recent years about young people were not so interested in owning cars anymore. The Uber and Lyft phenomenon is amazing. I recently flew into Houston. You can't even get a taxi there anymore. It's just, dial car services like Uber. So how do you see that? How are attitudes towards vehicle ownership changing, and particularly among the young?
Yes. So Uber and Lyft is really just glorified hitchhiking, right? It's hitchhiking with an app. You have a completely false sense of security because you have an app. But I do appreciate that those apps have evolved so that you can share locations with people. So, they've taken measures. I know, like for me, the driver has to give me I have to give the driver a 4-digit code that matches. You can set this on your phone with Uber and possibly with Lyft. I use Uber. I use both of them back and forth, but you're able to now make yourself safer. You match the license plate. You've got this 4-digit PIN. All of that goes into easing the minds again of keeping consumers safe this time while you drive around in a stranger's car. What we're finding though is that once young people settle down, once they partner up, once they have a kid, any of that, even a pet, the reality is that owning a car is just a lot more convenient than anything. Trying to schlep your kid around with a baby seat in and out of taxis. This is why we see cars in New York City of all places. At the end of the day, it really is more convenient to have a vehicle. I think that we are seeing vehicle ownership moving in terms of people are buying their first car a little bit later. Young people aren't, when we were growing up, you wanted a car as soon as you turned 16. That's not so much the case anymore because again, teenagers and kids are being driven around more by their parents, and they're being driven around again by Uber and Lyft. So it's a little bit different use of the vehicle, but we are still seeing consumers buying vehicles maybe just a little bit later in life.
Yeah. Parents kind of indulged their kids and made them feel like, oh, they can get driven anywhere, anytime. So why buy a car? But let's talk further about what kind of things younger people in particular want from their cars, which will get us more into the electronics issues that you were raising before. So, what's different about what young people expect today from a car, or what people in general expect in terms of what they can do once they're in the car compared to the past?
Right. So nowadays, regardless of age, we do expect our car to work seamlessly with our phone. We expect it to be something that is almost a movable office. You know, a lot of people are digital nomads now, right? They work from anywhere. They expect their car to meet these expectations of when you sit in the vehicle, it automatically, ideally wirelessly connects to your phone. It wirelessly connects to Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, Google, and just works without any thought. We don't want to fight with these things. This is one of the reasons why we see more and more Waymo and autonomous driving vehicles, especially again out here in California. We see them everywhere and people are using them. People are becoming more comfortable with that idea because the level of productivity that you have when you're being driven, and also you don't have to be nice to anybody. You can just work on your phone.
Yeah, I think the success of Waymo and the excitement that people feel in using it is really surprising to me and to many, to see the really rapid uptake that's happening. And it is true. You have greater privacy, for example. It's not something that was initially discussed about what would be different with a self-driving vehicle.
Exactly. You do. You have the level of productivity. I was talking to a colleague the other day. He was taking the train here in California rather than driving because he was so much more productive. He could work for a few hours on the train. And that idea, the privacy of your own vehicle without needing to hire a driver, which most people can't afford, and instead you just use a Waymo vehicle. So again, this is where we're seeing tremendous strides in autonomous driving, still centered around durability, reliability, and safety.
Yeah, and obviously we live in a phone-based society or a device-based society where everything really comes through that little rectangle of glass that we carry with us everywhere, and that's as true for cars as for anything. I mean, there's sort of an integration of the phone and the vehicle now that's much more complete than it ever was before, right?
Well, there's an integration of the phone and the vehicle and your home as well, because now you can activate devices in your home through Alexa, which I can't say her name because she'll start activating at my home. But you can do this. You can do this, as you approach your home, or even I've been known to sit at a traffic light nearby my house and I'll deactivate my Ring devices from there because I'm going to go into my house. So these kinds of, again, this connectivity, we also expect it even when we're out of town, when we're renting a car, we expect our device to again seamlessly connect with whatever rental car and on a global basis. So even when we're traveling around the world, I lived overseas just a couple of years ago. I was able to check in on my apartment on the Ring devices, from 9,000 miles away. So we really are a highly connected society at all times.
Well, we talked about Waymo. Let's just talk a little more about the future of autonomy and autonomous vehicles. We hear a lot of talk about it. It hasn't happened as fast as some predictions initially were, but it does seem like more and more cars are getting more and more autonomous features and self-driving capabilities. How do you see that trajectory?
So they're getting more what we call ADAS, automated driver assisted systems. And these include things like lane keep assist, where you're driving your car. If you kind of start drifting, your car will literally pull you back. A huge number of cars, even backup cameras, which are now standard in vehicles, that's considered an ADAS, where it's aiding your driving, and in this case, parking, both in and out of a vehicle of a parking spot. But I recently drove the Kia Telluride, has fantastic ADAS systems. I was driving to Las Vegas. When you put on your blinker, it literally will start helping you move over into the next lane. It was fascinating. And then it'll turn off your blinker for you as well. So you don't have those blinkers that are going, the indicators going on down the road. But we also see things like brake avoidance, pedestrian avoidance. This also plays into the design of the vehicle, by the way. If you notice, more vehicles are having this very square front end. That in part is due to pedestrian crash zones. So we're trying to obviously keep people safer. So here in California, people will randomly walk into crosswalks because they're so used to having the right of way, and you've got to slam on your brakes. If your car can do that for you, my gosh, that's just better for everybody and react so much faster.
For Teslas, for example, you can get on the highway, it'll drive where you need to go, change lanes, whatever. Is the popularity of Waymo sort of a leading indicator that maybe we're going to have more and more personally owned vehicles that really do a lot of that? Obviously, when you drive into your driveway and figure out where to park, you're going to maybe need to do that manually. But are we heading toward a world, a country where much of the time we just get in a car, give it an instruction, and sit back?
We are, and parking is actually probably one of the best uses of self-driving right now, of automated features, because it's very defined. The markers are defined, a car is defined. One of the challenges really today is that we've tried to roll out much of these autonomous features in urban environments, which are some of the busiest environments that a vehicle operates in. Again, when you think about driving in New York City or driving in any major city, you've got people, you've got pets, you've got baby carriages, you've got other cars, you've got emergency vehicles, you have those crazy little Uber Eats little devices driving around as well now. So you've got all these inputs, which is incredibly complex. Versus like on the highway, I love to see commercial trucking adopt more ADAS and more autonomous driving, keeping the driver involved, but being able to operate a vehicle for longer distances, longer time, and keeping that driver safer because they don't have to sit there and operate and concentrate on the road for 8 straight hours. So thinking about driver fatigue and the easing of driver fatigue is really, again, keeping these people safer and keeping the roads safer as well. Distracted driving is a huge, huge issue, as we know. And it's really almost more than drunk driving, because drunk driving is known to be, it's something that we've all grown up now with MAD and SAD and organizations like that. Everyone knows you should never drink drive. At the same time, people would use their phones. So distracted driving continues to be a big challenge.
So we're heading towards more autonomy. Probably still most of the cars we have will be able to take control of at some point. We're not going to go to steering wheel free vehicles for our ordinary use very, very soon, right?
So that is certainly the goal, because it leads really arguably to fewer accidents and, again, keeping people safe. What the challenge here is that we are in a very mixed environment where we've got full self-driving cars, we've got vehicles on the road. The average car is 12 years old on the road today. They're not filled with all of these safety features. So we've got a real mix of, back in 100 years ago, we had a mix of horses, carriages, and cars that only lasted about 10 years, though, because cars took over very, very quickly. This evolution is much longer. Ironically, cars are lasting longer than ever, which is actually delaying both the greening of the fleet and the safety of the fleet. So we've got older cars that are staying on the road even longer. Great for the environment, keeping them out of the landfill, right? So that's terrific. We like that. But at the same time, we do still have older, less fuel efficient, less safe vehicles on the road.
What does that mean about the used car landscape?
So used cars, I'm so glad you asked that, because used cars is really interesting, especially from an EV standpoint, because now we actually have more used cars available, but more EVs specifically available than ever. Keeping in mind, if you do go shopping for one, check to see what the health of the battery is, what the capabilities of that battery are. There are ways to find out how much life is left in your battery. Make sure that you ask that question. It should come up in the diagnostic that they can scan for you. But there is opportunity to buy more used EVs than ever.
We've also seen some real innovations in the used car buying process from some amazing services that deliver it to your home and that allow you to do it from your phone, et cetera, right?
We do, yes. And we are seeing continued push in direct to consumer brands like Rivian, Lucid, of course, Tesla was the first one. We are seeing Volkswagen has a new all electric brand called Scout. It's not a new trademark, it's not a new brand, but they are bringing it back. That's a fully EV brand that they're coming out with in 2026. They are looking to go direct to consumer, bucking the trend of Volkswagen, but that's still in discussion. So we'll see how they do. But the great thing about direct to consumer for a lot of buyers is that you don't have to go to the dealer. They will bring the car to you. You can do a lot of this online. We're seeing Hyundai with Amazon Auto, being able to buy a car, along with your toothpaste, you can buy a Hyundai on Amazon as well, taking delivery at the dealer.
So it sounds like, on balance, and I want to talk in a second about where future trends may be taking us, but you think auto ownership is very healthy and is going to stay really strong.
I do, especially in particular in the US, but across the world as well. I worked with a fabulous designer who would often say, nobody dreams of getting on the bus. People dream of owning their own car. And I do think that we see this and we see car adoption continuing to grow. I spent a lot of time in India, I spent time in China. Of course, in these countries, we continue to see this development. We do see it also in places like in other parts of Asia, but a lot of that is Chinese vehicles. And a good portion, not a lot of it, but some are EVs as well. So we do continue to see vehicle ownership and new vehicle ownership ever expanding.
Yeah, Chinese cars are selling all over the world. It's amazing. So talk a little bit about the future. Where's all this going? Give us some of the things that we should expect to see in coming years.
So I think that we'll continue to see vehicles capable of over-the-air updates. This gets back to the idea of vehicles being on the road longer. With over-the-air updates, you can literally turn on features in a vehicle and you can update them and upgrade them. So things like pedestrian or some of the sensors that are on a vehicle, as technology and software increases and chips get better and faster, we're actually able to update that. If the chip and the heart and the software in your vehicle, if something like a semiconductor chip is able to accept a higher speed and a software, you can upgrade that. And so that's a huge improvement that, again, keeping vehicles on the road longer out of the landfill.
Yeah, Tesla was a pioneer of that, of course. Yeah, Tesla pioneered.
Yes, exactly. We're also seeing simplification in car manufacturing. So we're seeing the ability to use the same platform or the foundation of the vehicle and putting all different body styles on it. This is something that's come out about in the last 15 years or so, where we're able to expand. You can make a car longer, you can make a car shorter, you can make it wider, something that really a lot of innovations. That CAD design, as we talked about earlier, all of that is coming into play. The challenge again is that we're making cars more complex. So while they can be simpler to manufacture, the pricing may not come down because we're adding more and more complexity to the vehicle. Durability. This again is where steel plays a major factor in this, and the quality of your steel. I am amazed living out here in California. I grew up in Connecticut where all the sand and salt all winter long, cars rust out. Out here in California, you can see a 25-year-old vehicle that is gorgeously pristine. All of that is due to the quality of the steel and the fact that it's not exposed to corrosive materials. So I do think that we'll continue to see expectations from the consumer of their vehicle lasting longer. It's incredibly expensive to buy a vehicle these days. Consumers demand a lot.
I know that when you look toward the future, you talk about something you said in our preparatory conversation, sustainability with a small s. What do you mean by that?
So sustainability with a small s is really about future proofing. It's about resiliency. I overlook the Pacific Palisades out here, and Altadena is not far from me either. And I really see, that this opportunity amongst the tragedy, there really is an opportunity to rebuild in a fire resilient manner, to use fire resilient materials, to use materials that are appropriate for the environment. This to me is sustainability with a small s. We are building both housing and vehicles for the long term so that we're not filling up the landfill. We're not, in an environment where we're not able to recycle so many of the materials that are in a vehicle. We want to be sustainable in an efficient manner and also in a way that we can build multi-generational vehicles that are able to stay on the road, that are able to be updated with over-the-air updates, and have all the safety features that consumers demand and be able to make continuous improvements in these vehicles as they're on the road.
Well, however much attitudes may be changing, nobody argues with efficiency. Efficiency is a very hot topic, obviously. One thing also that people often don't realize, if such a huge percentage of the car is being made with steel, steel is probably as recyclable as any material we use. It is more or less 100% recyclable. So there is a sustainable element in vehicles that when it does eventually wear out, that steel can be reused.
Absolutely. And that's one of the beauties of steel is this continuous recyclability of it. It's fantastic. I mean, really the goal of recycling is to keep materials out of the landfill. That's what you want to do. And the challenge again is when we think back to the consumer, recycling has to be convenient. It has to, the idea of something like a single stream recycling, right? So you can throw everything in one bag, throw it in the recycling system, and be able to then, at the end of the line, they're able to recycle and sort and do all the sorting elsewhere. The challenge for consumers is when you expect them to know enough and to be educated enough to say, okay, I've got to put, this type of recycling in one bag, this type of recycling in another. That's too confusing. It's too inconvenient. Single stream recycling, everything gets to be put in one bag and sent across. When it comes to vehicle manufacturing, being able to use things like recyclable cloth in the seats, recyclable foam, all of these, even recyclable electronics, taking the batteries. One thing when we think about batteries that I love, and GM did this at a program more than 10 years ago, vehicles require a tremendous amount of battery power to push them down the road. But you can reuse those batteries in other places that don't require as much. So I was at a GM event and they were actually powering the tent with old Volt batteries and they were able to reuse those. So again, this is a way to keep them out of the landfill and being able to reuse something like a battery that came out of a car, but able to power something not as intensive as a car.
Yeah, used EV batteries are being used in the electric power grid in some places in big aggregations. So that's a kind of a cool thing. Well, Rebecca, this has been a great conversation. What haven't I asked you that I should have? What are there any final thoughts you have for our listeners about where cars are going, the role of steel, any aspect of this very rich topic that we all get so involved with?
I know, right? I love talking about cars. I love cars my whole life. So I'll talk to you for hours about this. I think that when I think about the consumer, what I'd love to see is I love putting the right car in the right driveway. And to me, that means that you're buying a vehicle that within your budget, that meets your wants and needs, that when you park it, you look back and look at it and you smile at it, right? It's a good feeling. People invest a lot of money in their vehicle. I want them to love it. When it comes to durability, nothing matches steel. And I would say this whether I was talking to US Steel or not. The reality is nothing matches the durability and the innovation that we're seeing in steel, especially when it comes to that high strength, high durability, lightweight steel. I would challenge people to really find a comparable material in today's world. So I love the innovation that US Steel is doing. I love people putting in the right car, in the right driveway, get the most fuel efficient version of what suits your wants and needs.
Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today for this great conversation. We are going to have a few additional Steel Stories episodes coming up in the near future, which Rebecca will be hosting to go into other aspects of the auto industry. So keep your eye out for those. Really excited about that, Rebecca. And for now, thank you for today's show. I'm David Kirkpatrick, and we hope to see you again on Steel Stories. So come back and listen to more about steel and autos and all kinds of great stuff.
Steel Stories is brought to you by US Steel. The views expressed by guests are their own and not necessarily the views of US Steel. To find out more about our sustainable steel solutions, visit www.ussteel.com. Search for US Steel in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss a future episode. On behalf of the team here at US Steel, thanks for listening.